Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is From Software's dive into Victorian-era eldritch horror in 2015's Bloodborne.
Following that is 2012's Katawa Shoujo, the community-made visual novel that's written with a whole lot of heart, all about dating girls with physical disabilities. New Glasses Club!
Yeah, I don't think I've ever shown my glasses on my original glasses on the show before, but these are new glasses. You have new glasses.
I do.
We're the New Glasses Boys.
New Glasses Club, so check that out on the video version of Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel if you want to check that out. Just wanted to stylize and show that off a little bit. Well, we have great soundtracks that we can listen with our ears this time around.
That's what I've been doing wrong.
Joe, I have never played Bloodborne. I have it sitting in my PlayStation 4 collection, and it's just these Soulsborne games that I struggle to get into, and yet I find myself buying Sekiro Shadows Die Twice this week.
Well, that's the main reason why we're doing Bloodborne, because Sekiro, so I'm glad you brought that up. But I also have never beaten Bloodborne. I've played it, so I need to put this at the top. I've never beaten Bloodborne, and a large swath of it I've never seen or experienced, because Bloodborne is one of those games that I have aspirations of one day I'm gonna beat it. Myself. I'm gonna do it. Come hell or high water, I'm gonna beat that game. I have only ever made it as far as Vicar Amelia, and she has proven to be a wall that I cannot get around. So, in a way, I'm not too much better off, but I do have some experience with Bloodborne, and it is a very good game. I very much enjoy it. I'm not very good at it, but it's good. It's fun.
And so, for my lack of knowledge with the game, I always hear great things about the soundtrack, but it's not like the tracks stand out and they're played during award shows or like, the best of video game music, but yeah, you still hear great things about it, so I, hopefully like our listeners, looking forward to learning about it today from you.
Well, let's just jump on into it then. Bloodborne, as most of you probably know, came out in March of 2015. It actually released in every sort of area. It was like, in America, it came out on the 25th, then it came out in Japan on the 26th, then in Australia on the 27th, and then in the PAL region on the 28th, I think.
Wow.
And it was this weird, release among different days. It's bizarre. I don't think I've ever actually seen that happen before.
When it's not like a worldwide release on one day.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Usually it's like there's a couple months or something between a release, not we release it here one day, and here the next day, and here the next day, and here the next day. It's just weird. It's a weird way of releasing a game, but hey, I don't work for FromSoft, so... the game was actually developed parallel to Dark Souls 2, which is the reason why Dark Souls 2 is the only game that Hidetaka Miyazaki has never, or did not, direct.
That's interesting. I never knew that.
Yeah, and it's largely considered, Dark Souls 2 is largely considered the worst game in the series. Not bad, but it's considered very flawed compared to 1 and 3.
I feel like out of the 3, and some people can mix in Demon Souls if they want to as well, as part of the Soulsborne series, but I feel like out of the 3 Dark Souls game, you generally hear the consensus is that 2 is the weakest.
Yeah, and so Bloodborne can be directly blamed for that, because Miyazaki was working on it when Bloodborne 2 was in development, which I found kind of interesting. A lot of people have sort of theorized that maybe Bloodborne started as Demon's Souls 2, because that was the last Souls game to be a PlayStation exclusive. Miyazaki has come out and said that is not the case. It was never planned to be Demon's Souls 2. It shares some design similarities, but that's really about it. He says that Sony approached them and specifically asked for a new IP. So it was never, Demon's Souls 2 was never in the books. It was announced at Sony's E3 conference in 2014, but it had been leaked ahead of that under the name Project Beast, which led to a lot of people referring to it as Beast Souls.
That name is a throwback. Wow. Yeah, I definitely remember that one.
I had forgotten about people talking about Beast Souls, but I do remember hearing about that.
See, I'd never really heard of Beast Souls, but I remember Project Beast and the different E3 rumors and whatnot.
It is an action horror game, much in the same vein as, say, Castlevania. Sort of the same themes. It's got horror themes to it, but it is not a scary game, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It takes place in a Victorian setting, which was a complete departure from the Souls team's usual fare, which is usually just medieval fantasy, stuff like that. The architecture in the levels is based on stuff in Romania and the Czech Republic, as well as just the general setting being inspired by the novel Dracula, which is another tie to Castlevania, which is really funny because most people say that one of the starting weapons is a cane that can turn into a whip. And I've seen many jokes say like, equip the whip, never take the whip off. Congrats, you're playing the only good 3D Castlevania game.
Or are you doing like a Belmont speedrun or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also pulls from a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's work, which Miyazaki had wanted to make a game with those sort of that setting and those themes for a long time. And he just didn't think that the PS3 was the place to do it. He didn't believe that that hardware was strong enough that they'd really be able to do it right. And so when Sony approached them with the PS4 and said, hey, we want an exclusive, he looked at the tech behind the PS4 and said, okay, yeah, this is the one. We'll do it here. And that's how Bloodborne was born. It is famous for encouraging a far more aggressive playstyle than the Souls games. The Souls games are all about take it slow, relax, stand back, look for an opening, get in there when you find the opening. Bloodborne is more about, what are you doing? Get in there. Do it. Go. That was a bit of a departure and a weird sort of change for how they were developing the game in general. For instance, one of the things they struggled with was the implementation of guns. They didn't actually know if they wanted to do that, even though it would fit with the setting. Being Victorian, there's pistols and blunderbusses and stuff now. Mm-hmm. And they finally kind of came to the conclusion of, well, they're not going to be as accurate as modern guns anyways. They wouldn't be in that setting. So they're probably fine. And guns became a central part of combat in Bloodborne. They're a sort of counter thing. Most enemies, if you fire the gun right as they're about to attack you, they'll go into a sort of prone position. And you can use what's called a visceral attack that will take a ton of their health. And that'll work for certain bosses as well.
It's really interesting to see like that gameplay style, and then you compare it to the Souls games. And then now Sekiro is coming out, which is another kind of, you want to kind of get in their face, but Sekiro is going to really rely on the parry and like the hard counter that way. So it's just interesting to see Miyazaki with these different game series try to mix up the combat just enough, and they still feel relatively similarly. But yeah, Sekiro, it's going to be parries and enhanced stealth. Stealth's going to be really important because it's losing the RPG elements. Yeah, Bloodborne, you always hear it's like, it's rush mode. Like, you just got to go attack, use the gun, kind of have the enemies off their feet that way. And then, as you said, yeah, Dark Souls, it's be very patient, very defensive, learn the patterns, roll, and then attack only when it's safe.
Yeah. And there is, I think, one shield in all of Bloodborne. And it's not very useful as far as I'm aware. So they really tried to hammer home the gotta be aggressive. There's a mechanic where if you take damage, you will have a very short window of time where if you start attacking during that window of time, you'll get some of that health back for every hit that you land. They also sort of changed up the death penalties a little bit, though I'm not entirely sure how, because I've played the game what I read, everything I read was like, they changed up the death penalties a little bit. I've played Dark Souls 1 and I've played Bloodborne, and I don't notice a huge difference. So if somebody does know what difference that is, please tell me, because I'm confused. But they did say that the reason that they did it, whatever it was, is that they didn't really like the Souls games and didn't want Bloodborne to be pigeonholed into being considered a game that is for hardcore gamers only. Which, while I understand that sentiment, and I am all for accessible games, you guys made a hardcore game. That's what Dark Souls is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what all these games generally are. I mean, it's...
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, sure. But yeah, try as they may, they're not going to get around that.
And it released and had universal acclaim. People loved it. It is considered one of the strongest games in the series. It is technically a part of the Dark Souls series, though it's really its own franchise, but people consider it a Souls game. They call Souls Soulsborne now, specifically because of this game.
You just heard me say it earlier, so yeah.
Yeah. Personal opinion here is that the one thing that I dislike about Bloodborne is blood vials. In Dark Souls, you have Estus. That's your healing. And you have a set number of Estus, and when you run out, you're out until you sit down at a bonfire or you die. And then you get all your Estus back. In Bloodborne, blood vials are a pickup item that is finite. You can run out and you don't get them back when you die or go to a lantern. And so it just becomes this, do you want to try this boss over and over again? Better go grind for blood vials. And in certain ways, it feels like the game is programmed to not allow you to do that. Because if the game senses that you are going to kill the same enemies over and over again to grind blood vials, those enemies will stop dropping blood vials.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the roadblocks that I really like Bloodborne, but that's one of my biggest problems with the game. I think Estus would have worked a lot better. They should have just stuck with a system similar to that. I get that it's supposed to encourage the more aggressive playstyle, but I'm not a big fan of it. That's just personal opinion there. So the music of Bloodborne was done by multiple individuals, being Ryan Amon, Tsukasa Saito, Yuka Kitamura, Nobuyoshi Suzuki, Chris Velasco, and Michael Windmacher. We are going to focus on Ryan Amon, who he was my focus because he's the first one listed on Wikipedia.
Generally means that the first person listed contributed the most to a work of art. Stands to reason there.
And then it just sort of turned out that 3 out of 5 of my critical tracks were by him. So that worked out.
Yeah.
And those were picked before I decided to focus on Ryan Amon, by the way. Mr. Amon was born in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. It was very hard to find information on him. He doesn't have a Wikipedia article. He does have a website that has very little information on him. And as far as I could tell, no interviews that weren't just all of the composers of Bloodborne. So it was very difficult to find information on his personal life. It does mention on his website that he started composing music at a young age. His first 2 instruments were the classical piano and saxophone, which is a new one for us, I think.
I think so, yeah.
I don't think we've hit anybody that's played saxophone, so that's cool.
As someone who learned saxophone starting in 5th grade, shout out to the sax.
There you go. He graduated from the McNally Smith College of Music in St. Paul, Minnesota. And it said on his website that he served as a ghostwriter and library music composer for several TV shows. I don't 100% know what that means, but he listed a bunch. The 2 that stood out to me were Oprah and Shark Tank.
Interesting. I mean, of course, ghostwriter would be that you're writing music, but you're not really getting credited for it. Mm-hmm. Or in other instances, someone else is taking the credit for it, or it's under like a pen name or something like that. A library music composer, I'm just guessing that it's not necessarily like, the main theme music, but, there are different audio beds that can, take place for certain segments of a show, or, reality TV, it's all over the place. it could be things like that. But that's really interesting because, yeah, you're not going to say, for a format like Shark Tank or for a talk show like Oprah, like, yeah, those shows aren't going to have music composed by credits. I mean, they're may end the scroll at the end, but it's not like it's a serial or a drama or a comedy that gets that kind of credit.
He eventually ended up in Bolivia, which is where his wife's family lived. And there he founded a film advertising company called City of the Fallen, which is a metal name for an advertising company.
Pretty cool.
And this company has done music for trailers of multiple high-end movies, including the one he specifically pointed out being The Avengers.
Oh, nice.
So that's pretty interesting. And he says that his main influence when it comes to creative works, which I found extremely interesting considering the game we are talking about, is his Christian faith.
Yeah. And
I find that fascinating.
Okay, yeah, not to knock the faith or anything like that, of course. But yeah, it is very ironic in that sense when you get to work on something that is so dark and eldritch, and yeah, that's very interesting.
And he also just has a love for music from all around the world, and he just really likes experimenting with music. So he seems like a cool dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
He seems very talented. His discography is very short, being he, of course, worked on Bloodborne. The other video game he has done music for is Assassin's Creed Unity.
Good soundtrack. Not the best Assassin's Creed game, but good soundtrack. Nice.
He's also done music for 2 films, one being a film called Black Hat, which I had never heard of. It is described as a cyber thriller, and it stars Chris Hemsworth. So there's that. And also for I think it's the Mark Wahlberg movie Elysium.
Was it him or Matt Damon?
It might have been Matt Damon. They look exactly the same.
I don't know about that, but yeah, it's a sci-fi movie. It's a notable one. That's well done. Yeah.
And something I found very interesting that he described about the Elysium soundtrack is on that one, he specifically experimented with including things like baboon calls and the buzzing of mosquitoes, as well as Mongolian throat singing on that score. And that's kind of cool. So, Bloodborne. The soundtrack includes over 80 minutes of original music. It was recorded by a 65-piece orchestra and a 32-person choir, and was recorded in London at the Air Studios. And the soundtrack itself took 2.5 years to develop.
Oof, wow.
Which is a while for a soundtrack, to be honest. You don't usually see a time for how long a certain soundtrack took to record.
Not usually, yeah.
I've never hit that in any of the research I've done before this, at least. I don't know if you have. I don't think you have. You've never mentioned it.
No, and I think it's probably in this case, I mean, you have a couple factors. One, it's all the different composers working together. I mean, it's when it's usually like a 1 or 2, 3 person effort, like it's usually easier, but I mean, the big composition team for one. And then that's a lot of musicians to get to work together and scheduling and all that. So I mean, probably a couple factors there.
And it's not just the fact that it's so many composers. It's also just like half of them are Japanese and half of them are Western. And so there's all that mixing around, which they said was one of the things that they really think contributed to this being such a great soundtrack is the Japanese composers brought in a bunch of new ideas that Westerners usually wouldn't do. Meanwhile, the Western composers were like, we're gonna make it sort of like scoring a film, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. And in this situation, I think it did very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 keywords that they apparently worked from were mortal struggle and horror, which, yeah,
kind of nailed that
that's
one.
Bloodborne.
Yeah.
And they were also just working from boss designs and level maps that they were given throughout development. One thing that I did find especially interesting was Amon says that the score of the film Bram Stoker's Dracula really sort of served as an inspiration for his work on this soundtrack because it was the first soundtrack he had ever bought. as a young man.
Hmm.
So that's super interesting. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the game itself was based on a lot of things in Dracula. And to keep in the Victorian setting, they specifically decided to avoid using instruments like the organ. They didn't use woodwinds, trumpets, certain other brass instruments. They stuck with just an orchestra and vocals. And there's some brass instruments in there, but not a lot of them.
Yeah, if anything, you'd want to go more the lower register.
Yeah.
Higher pitched brass instruments wouldn't really fit the theming. They made the right call there.
They avoided going for anything grandiose, as they described it, and instead strived for what they refer to as black and withered for the atmosphere.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's get into those 5 critical tracks, shall we? The first one, I can think of no better place to start than the main theme of the game, Bloodborne. So this song is intimidating. It is creepy. It is kind of mysterious at the start. And it does this thing that I've noticed that the entire soundtrack sort of builds itself around, which is this theme of building. It starts quiet and creepy and builds up into almost a panicked, sort of intense. It just turns into an almost completely different song by the end. And this theme specifically is helped a lot by its vocals. It's very creepy, sort of single female vocals. Eventually the orchestra takes over instead, and just the orchestral stabs behind it. Oh, it's such a cool song.
Yeah, it's a really good way to kind of start off the taste of what this soundtrack is like. Again, like my first time hearing a lot of these with doing the research for this. And yeah, it's a really cool starting point.
After that, you have The Hunter. So this is the theme for the first real boss fight. There's a boss you can fight before this guy, called the Cleric Beast, but it's optional. You don't have to fight it to get anywhere. But this guy is directly in the path of progression. His name is Father Gascoigne. He is a fellow hunter that has gone insane with the plague that is infecting the city of Yarnham, which is turning people insane and into monsters. I am heavily familiar with this boss fight because before I got to Amelia, this is the boss fight I saw the most. He's hard. And he's also just this cool little way of showing off this is how boss fights are going to go in this game sometimes. They aren't always going to be giant monsters. Sometimes they're just going to be people like you.
Mm.
And so this song starts frightening and creepy again, but about halfway through, it suddenly gets a lot more intense. And again, that building up theme that I was talking about in the last song, because once you get him about halfway, I want to say, maybe it's about 2/3 of the way, he actually turns into a werewolf, and then the fight drastically changes.
Okay, all right.
So, and some would say that part is the easier part. I rarely got there before I beat him, so I don't remember. The song reflects that by just becoming a lot more panicked and, oh, there's a werewolf. Oh, God. All right, time to figure this out. I really, really like this song and just, again, the build-up. The build-up's a big part of this whole soundtrack, almost. After that, we have The Hunter's Dream. Speaking of the opposite of the theme of a build-up into a panic, this song is quiet. It's serene. It's lonely. This is the hub world, the Hunter's Dream, where you go and it's completely safe. This is where you can go to level up. This is where you can go to upgrade your weapons, buy things if you've got blood echoes left. And so they needed to portray that through the music. And it's just this quiet, there's some quiet strings behind it. You've got a cello playing almost mournfully. Just, it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous piece.
Yeah, totally different than the first two. But I like the change of pace. Again, like we like to show how like there's the diversity in the soundtrack. I mean, if it's all, you know, fast strings and crazy frenetic pace, like it all starts to blend together, but you need that downtime, as you said. So like it's definitely important with this track.
And obviously the rest of them are, the next two are straight up boss themes. Cause for the most part, if you've never played a Soulsborne game, they're kind of silent music wise, unless you are fighting a boss, in which case most of the bosses have their own music to accompany them. And Bloodborne is no different. There's no music in regular areas. It's in the bosses that you hear any of this. Every single Soulsborne game has a spot that is just a place of respite. And you need a song that really portrays that, and Hunter's Dream does it perfectly. After that, you have Mikolash. God, I hope that's how you pronounce it. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it.
Sounds right to me.
I have never seen this boss. The next two songs are from bosses that I've never seen. I've only read about a little bit. And in Mikolash, apparently, he is a man that sees through the nightmare. Which, that's the whole thing of Bloodborne, is you are trapped in the Hunter's nightmare. And you cannot get out. Every time you die, you just go back to where you were before. And then you have to just keep on fighting until you can find a way to leave. But Mikolash knows he's in a dream. He's well aware. And apparently, he never shuts up. And I sort of interpreted that as, oh, so he's like a crazy, unstable dude who knows that the old ones have trapped him in this nightmare. And so he's because that's a big thing in Eldritch stuff and H.P. Lovecraft stuff, is the old ones drive you insane. If you know about them, you're crazy now. And so I think this song really portrays that super well, because the piano, especially the piano backing, almost sounds like a crazy person just sort of jamming on a piano. And obviously that's not what it is, because there's a controlled melody sort of playing there. But it's sort of this controlled madness almost that is really creepy and actually sort of puts a chill up my spine. And this is one of those ones that I really hope one day to see in context.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such an interesting piece. And Mikolash was done by Michael Windmacher, not Ryan Amon. This is one of the two songs that was done by somebody other than Mr. Amon, including the next one, which is The First Hunter. This song was done by Tsukasa Saito and is the final boss theme of Bloodborne, where you fight a character that I'm aware of. His name is German. He is a hunter that you meet in the hunter's dream. He sort of, I believe, runs it, I think. I don't really know for sure. This song is sad. Like, all the other boss themes in this game are either creepy, or they're intense, or panicky, or a mixture of all three of those things. But the first hunter is a sad piece. And it's also intense. But it's got this weird sort of melancholy feel to it because from what I was reading, it's sort of something that you as the player don't exactly want to do. Because this character is just trying to help you, but they're trying to help you in a way that's going to harm them. And you are trying to stop that from occurring.
It's almost like a sad version of It Has to Be This Way, or at least the themes behind the lyrics from that song when we were talking about Metal Gear Rising last time. And it's like it's inevitable. I hate to do this, but
and I just find it so interesting that they have this big epic boss theme and it's the final boss of their action game. And it's sad. That's super interesting to me. I really, really like that.
I think it's my favorite of the 5. Because of that sense of feeling. It has that epic scale, but you're absolutely right. It does have that melancholy, like kind of resigned to that fact sort of feeling. Yeah.
And so let's get into the cutting room floor. 2 of these I just kind of find super interesting, and then one of them, if I had a 6th slot, it would go on without a doubt, 100%. First one being a lullaby for Margot. Because this song is interesting. Because this is a boss theme.
Super cool instrumentation in this one. Totally different than anything else.
Very, very different. It's one of the last bosses in the game, from what I gathered. Against, I believe, Margot's wet nurse. It's just this music box theme that's... You don't expect to hear that in a boss fight, but I guess it does fit the horror theme very well. After that, you got Moonlit Melody. Which, from what I was reading, replaces the Hunter's Dream eventually. I don't know when. I've never gotten that far, but apparently it does. It's a very, very gorgeous piece.
It's a really cool song, and a lot of the YouTube comments point out that the voice sounds a lot like the Assassin's Creed Revelations theme, and boy, are they not wrong.
It's again very serene, so I like that song. But if I had a 6th slot, the song that would be going on there, by far, and it hurt me to cut it, is Cleric Beast. Now, I don't know if this song has made such an impact with me because it's the song that plays when you fight Vicar Amelia, but but it's such a good song, and I believe it's generally considered one of the more well-known songs in Bloodborne, and it pained me to cut it, but I needed to make mention of it at least. It's very good. So what'll I'll never forget? Screw you, Vicar Amelia. I just want to see more of the video game. Can you just let me see more of the game? And by that I mean the atmosphere of Yarnham. Yarnham is an extremely cool city from a design standpoint. it scratches this horror itch despite not really actually being a horror game per se. It's got horror themes, but I wouldn't consider it a scary game.
It's a game that I need to get to. I really do need to get to. Amongst all these other games that you've certainly recommended for us listening and for me personally. But it's also interesting to see other people get to play it and then say like it's ruined games for them. Prime example being Jason Schreier over at Kotaku. And he says, coworker's been bugging me for the longest time to play Bloodborne. And then he does, and it's like, oh, I get it now. And now like I cannot go back. So it's certainly very interesting to see. And the soundtrack, again, I've found, and maybe others listening find as well, that when you learn about these tracks, and then there's some that say like, oh, you don't want the soundtrack spoiled. And it's like, yeah, if you don't know the full context, maybe sometimes it depends on the game. But a lot of times I've recently found that, learning about these tracks and then going to play the game and then hearing this track in the game really kind of helps enhance the experience. And I think that may be the case for me when I get around to playing Bloodborne.
Mm-hmm. Stay tuned 600 years from now when I finally beat Bloodborne.
And with our old hands.
They keep me on life support. I can't die until I've beaten Bloodborne, I told myself.
You beat Vicar Amelia and it's like, it's time to go.
I've finally done it. Sir, there's so much more game. No, it's too late. So we like to do our transitions with a highlighting of a fan cover, usually whether it's from like OC Remix or anything like that. I actually went hunting on YouTube because I had never heard something, and there was a lot of choices. Like Little V has done a lot of stuff about this game, but I stumbled upon a channel I had never heard of called Cello Boy MJ, and he did a cello cover of the Amygdala boss fight theme, which is really good. He's also done a couple other Bloodborne songs, but this one really stood out to me. So yeah, please enjoy that.
So once again, I seem to have picked a game that is just radically different than yours.
These two seem exactly the same to me. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, I mean, one episode we did Devil May Cry 3 and Kirby's Epic Yarn, and now
I don't think we're ever going to top that. That is the most polar opposite we could have possibly gone.
Dude, I don't know. This is pretty close. You go from Bloodborne, an action game with all these eldritch themes, to Katawa Shoujo, a visual novel game that is free, by the way. So if any of this interests you, it is free. Go get it, download, etc. But it was developed by a multinational group of users from 4chan and other internet communities. So when a lot of people say like that's the 4chan visual novel, it's like, yes, in a way. And it makes it seem like, especially at the time when it was, 4chan, many of the dregs of the internet society in those dark corners of 4chan, like it sounds like it could be really bad, especially when Katawa Shoujo translates to disability girls. And it's a Bishoujo-style visual novel from 4 Leaf Studios that tells the story of a young man and 5 young women living with varying disabilities. Players take the role of Hisao Nakai, who attends a high school that specializes in providing education and healthcare for students with disabilities after he has a heart attack caused by long-dormant cardiac arrhythmia. So when you say like, oh, this 4chan visual novel where you date girls with physical disabilities, and it's like that could go down some real dark corners and just be terrible, it's actually a really heartwarming and genuinely well-written and emotional experience.
I agree.
And so I think it's really special game in that regard. And I found the soundtrack really interesting when I was playing it back in its launch in 2012, and doing research on it now, I find it even more interesting. But before we get to that, I'll tell you a little bit more about this game. So because it's a visual novel, player choice determines the game's events. And the choices that you make in the first act of the game can lead to story paths for these 5 main girls. The story paths, as you work through them, they eventually have either good, neutral, or bad endings, depending again on your choices. And if in that first act you don't make any choices, there's a separate bad ending that concludes the story right there. The game released in English on January 4th, 2012, and since then it had subsequently been released in French, Spanish, and Japanese, the latest of which was April 1st, 2015, so it took a few years to release in all of those languages. The kind of origins for the game, because you're like, how does this idea even come up? And the concept started with a sketch that was created in December 2000 by Japanese doujinshi artist Raita Hanjo. And so Raita, he does this drawing of 5 girls and different notes about them, and I guess it kind of stays dormant for a while, because then starting in January 2007, the sketch was discovered and discussed extensively on the 4chan image board. And interest was gathered there to make a game based on this, and they kind of accrued this development team that was called 4-Leaf Studios. Now, all of the artwork, the sound, the animation for the game, those were all original works, and each of the main 5 paths in the story each has its own writer. So some people wonder, like, if the quality varies from one to the other. I mean, that's probably why. Yeah, they try to make it all work cohesively, but 5 different writers for those 5 paths, each working on the one. The background photos in the game, they were either all public domain or they were taken by photographers on the team, and then they were filtered and blurred to kind of match the game's main art style of the characters. Interestingly enough, Yamaku High School, which is the main school setting, was constructed from images of Brown University in the United States. And then the city that the novel's generally set in, it's unnamed, but I guess it's based on Sendai. And the school was written to be where Aoba Castle stands in Japan, which is kind of like, I guess, in the northern area of Japan. So the game was received rather well when it launched. Definitely reviews noted that really special care and sincerity was taken for the subject matter. Again, you would think that it'd be crass and rude and all sorts of wrong, and it's really not. Because it is a visual novel, in this particular instance, there are the H scenes, the eroge elements, the sex scenes, as it were. But these are optional, and it's not like main plot events happen during them or main character development moments happen during them. So for those underage, they can be disabled and you're not going to miss a whole lot. But even these, when you have them on, they're handled tastefully and they're really respectful in that sense. It's not like, again, just blah, like, again, like, what are you doing here? But like, it fits. It kind of all fits with the overall tone of the story. Because this is a game that's really just a slice of life sort of story. And it really treats everyone as real people because, of course, they are. And yeah, to handle the writing with such care is really this game's biggest accomplishment. It's what made it stand out when different game websites were writing about it, and it really stands out when you're playing it. It really helps with just understanding different people and the empathy behind it all. So I think that's really important. And even Raita, the original doujinshi artist, commented, he made a blog post after the development was over, and he wanted to thank the developers because he had mentioned that he had been following and watching over the production of the game as it was being developed, and he was deeply affected by the thought of the challenges that the development team had to overcome.
Cool.
It's a really neat sort of come full circle sort of thing. I mean, this was not really like one person leading the charge for all this, but it was really a team effort of people across different websites, different countries, to kind of pull together based on an original sketch from years ago. And it just makes it this really heartfelt experience. Joe, I know you've played the game as well, and I'm sure you have thoughts on it.
I don't remember a huge amount from it. This is one of those games that has been like on my list of, I should really replay that for years. I do remember very vividly around when it came out, and our whole community of friends, we were all playing it. Yes. I don't think we've had a sort of time like that since, where everybody was playing it. Everyone. I am a fan of Lily, she is blind, and she is my favorite girl in the game.
Likewise, I think, she is the best route.
She's the best girl. It's just a fact now that both of us have agreed.
It's just a fact. But shouts out to Amy.
Yeah, Amy's pretty good. I like her a lot. The only one I don't really like is Shizune. I'm not a huge fan of her as a character, and I also just hate Misha. Misha used to be one of those characters that I jokingly was, I hate her so much, because that used to be who I am. It's kind of still who I am. But I'm just not a big fan of her character. She's fine. She's not terrible. I think she does have one of the more like poignant moments in the entire game.
Mm-hmm. I understand why people like Hanako, but she wasn't among my favorites. And Rin is perplexing. I like the aloofness and bluntness overall, but it's a perplexing route to play.
To this day, Rin's route is the only one I've never played. Not because I didn't want to, but because something happened and I just sort of stopped playing after I had finished the fourth route before heading into the fifth. So I do like Rin a lot as a character. I just never did her route.
So it's a really interesting game. And I think if that has interested you at all, again, it's free. You can Google Katawa Shoujo and find a place to download it. It's really easy to access and to get into. So I would highly recommend it. The composers for the project went by the names Nicole Armarfi and Blue 123. And Nicole Armarfi primarily did most of the legwork on the composition, and his real name is Sebastien Skaf. So we're going to profile him in this section here, which is really interesting because he is not a professional composer, unlike many of the others that we talk about when we're talking about these, AAA game experiences. This is an indie effort where this is a guy who likes composing music in his spare time. And he's done some side projects here and there, some personal works here and there, but he doesn't have an established career. Even to the point where he was born in April 1993 and he lives in Canada. That's right, 1993. When Katawa Shoujo launched, he was 18 years old at the time. That means in the years leading up to it, he was working on the soundtrack for the game at a younger age than that.
I don't know how to process that.
Exactly. I mean, I think it shows a lot of talent and a lot of potential. Even he just doesn't really have. It doesn't have a Wikipedia page. Doesn't have. He has an IMDb, but he worked on Katawa Shoujo. I found one interview and listened to that, so I was able to glean some information for research. But there's really not a lot of detail here. So I found what I could for you guys. So let's see here. When he was a child, he got a keyboard from his grandmother for Christmas, and being the fan of video games that he is, and musically inclined, he figured out some game tunes on it. He even noted that Saria's song from Ocarina of Time was the first tune that he got to figure out by ear. on the keyboard. So it's pretty neat. His parents noticed that, oh, he's spending some time with that keyboard. Let's get him a piano. And then he got to take lessons for it. As far as learning about visual novels and how they have soundtracks, he was inspired by the Higurashi anime. And I guess that comes from a visual novel. Yeah. And so he looked into that and was very interested. And it's like, that's what I wanted to work on the side, is, different projects for visual novels. Chopin and the famous Canadian pianist Oscar Peterson are some of his favorite composers and piano players. So he gets inspiration from them. But he says he flips burgers as his daytime job, or at least when the interview took place. Don't know since then. So yeah, really composes in his spare time. He has the interesting philosophy that art is never finished. It's only abandoned.
I've heard something very similar in a lot of mediums, is that, especially when you're trying to learn how to make games and stuff, one of the first things they tell you is there's no such thing as a finished game. There is a game that shipped. It's an interesting philosophy, and it's a fairly common one as far as I'm aware. And it's pretty true, I think. It reflects very true.
Yeah, and he definitely follows that. I mean, it's like, the songs have to be done at some point in order to ship. So when he was asked, like, which songs would you redo or touch up, he's like, all of them. Like, I'm sure I'd listen to it and, make little tweaks here and there. So that was very interesting to hear. But I don't know what's going on with Sebastien Skaf, because there was a Reddit thread that I came across that said, here's a backup of all of his past works, because it looks like he just went dark on all of his, channels, whether it's YouTube. He had a YouTube channel, but the channel's gone. He has a SoundCloud, but there's only a couple songs left there. So I hope everything is okay in his life, because this Reddit thread from a month ago seemed concerned, and like, here's where you can access all of his great music. So that was a bit concerning to come across. So I hope everything's well with Mr. Skaf there. But yeah, honestly, he does great work. Granted, Katawa Shoujo is the main game project that he's worked on. He says he's worked on a few other visual novels, but he says they're not nearly as wide in scope. And he's done some Undertale piano arrangements for like his own kind of album that he called Piano Tale. Again, you can find, like, I think someone re-uploaded that on YouTube if you want to check that out. But as far as when he worked on Katawa Shoujo's soundtrack, he said he read certain scenes, obviously, to get the direction on what the track composition should be like. But he says he's never actually played through a full route of the game during that interview, or at least at the time of that interview. He said that he doesn't have the attention span for that much reading, which I get for some people. I mean, not everyone's going to take to a visual novel, because yes, it absolutely is a lot of reading, and you have to kind of comprehend what's going on to make the proper decisions and all that.
I'm surprised I do, to be honest. I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised I haven't played a lot of other visual novels. In fact, this and Valhalla might really be the only two that I can think of off the top of my head. So,
I mean, it depends on how wide you extend and cast that net. I mean, there's Ace Attorney, there's Professor Layton, there's
That's true.
Danganronpa, which is the whole ton of reading as well.
Huh, I didn't think of Ace Attorney somehow. One of my favorite game series of all time. I didn't even think of it.
I guess, yeah, it's mixed with the crime serial there. But Skaf said that he was really only given just the descriptions of the heroines as far as creating their themes. And so he kind of had free reign for a lot of the work, which was, certainly liberating and helped with the creativity, but it just really left a lot of it up to him. And said, like, there were like 46 songs on the soundtrack that was all him, though he did get direction that they wanted to make Lily's theme a piano and cello piece. And so that was kind of all he got starting out there. His workflow that he discussed was very interesting, because I think it would be kind of like how I would compose music if I were kind of branching out into that sort of realm, but it's not how a lot of people would. So he composes solely with a computer mouse, using Finale to start, which is a sheet music program. And it's actually one that I've used before.
Same.
Yeah, Finale it's great for creating sheet music. You can kind of hear the MIDI sort of develop there. So he writes all the sheet music with the computer mouse, dropping notes in there and creating the melodies in that sense. He exports the MIDI from Finale, brings it into FL Studio, where then he can apply the different instruments to there and, all sorts of direction there, and kind of crafts it further from there. But no live instruments, no playing those instruments to either record them or get the MIDI sense. It's all done with the mouse, getting the sheet music first and the MIDI later. So I found that really interesting.
I also find that extremely interesting. When I've worked with MIDI in the past, personally, it's all been directly into a MIDI program. I've never done like sheet music or anything like that. I used Finale a little bit, like I said, but I never did it extensively. And I have long forgotten how to read sheet music.
Yeah.
That is a skill that is gone from my brain. So that is a very interesting way of doing it. I'll give him props on that.
Though it certainly helps when he's, kind of releasing these songs, he has the sheet music right there to, provide to people who are interested. So, certainly was available at the time.
More people need to do that. More studios. Put your official sheet music out there.
Yes, please. That would be fantastic. When other people would like to cover it or different groups could do so. Absolutely. But let's talk about the 5 critical tracks here. And I think a lot of them, for me, kind of revolve mostly around the character themes. Because they're kind of the ones I remember the most. I think they're the most iconic in the soundtrack. And they really give a good sense of when we're talking about the range. But it's not just the range of instruments and moods, but also the characters. So I wanted to kind of touch on them in the order that I played through all 5 routes in my Katawa Shoujo experience from way back when. So we're going to start with Hokabi. And I guess Amy has a different theme.
This one's kind of it. The other one is Standing Tall, which happens to also be her theme, kind of.
But this is the one I most associate with her. It's Amy's a passionate track star who loves running, loves exercise, but she's lost her legs in a car accident. So she kind of uses like the metal blades in a sense to run on. And this piece just has the energy of someone who loves to go, go, go and run, run, run.
She tends to be the first route that a lot of people do because hers is the most ridiculously easy to stumble your way into. It's
Yep.
One decision, and that decision overwrites everything if you do it.
Yeah, so a lot of people come across her route first. The feel of this piece is, it's just very happy. There's a lot of good interplay between the guitar, piano, and synth instrumentation. But yeah, Amy's got a really memorable route, and this piece is really a big reason why. After that, I went through the Lily route. So this is Concord. This piece was co-composed along with Blue 123, whose real name is Andy Andy. Andi for the last name there. I thought that was interesting for a name there. Parents, don't do that. Come on, man. Like that's just mean. This is Lily's theme, and for Lily to be the polite and composed ladylike figure in the game, who happens to as well be blind, the piano and the cello that kind of trade the melodies back and forth in a really relaxing manner is just so fitting for this character.
I would agree with that. And again, best girl. Sadly, it's not one of my favorite themes overall. In fact, I think it's, for me, the least memorable theme. Not to say it is a bad piece, it's a gorgeous piece. And like you said, there's just this ladylike feeling to it, and it fits her perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that relaxing mood sort of makes it a little bit less memorable to me, if that makes sense.
I guess so. Yeah, the melody doesn't stand out fully, and there are also a lot of songs that support Lily's route that are very memorable throughout the different narrative beats. The third one is Shizune's theme, and that's the third route I played, so her track is The Student Council.
As much as I don't like Shizune, I think she is my favorite theme.
It's a good one. Certainly, that guitar melody really starts out strong, with the piano kind of supporting it underneath. You get the strings in there eventually to sort of flesh out the whole composition. But Shizune is a really strong-willed and driven student council president who is deaf and mute. So you mentioned Misha earlier. And Misha is there as a sign language interpreter, not necessarily someone with a disability, but to assist at Yamaku High School. So the two play off each other in an interesting way. Misha definitely has her part to play in the story, but a lot of people say that Shizune's route as a whole is kind of like the weakest written, and I think I would kind of agree with that.
Mm-hmm. It's also the longest, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely the longest, but it's certainly a memorable theme. That kind of opening piano bit and the guitar kind of has this weird effect on it that you can tell is definitely MIDI because it's not the cleanest as far as pure recording, but it's something that like I only really associate with this game and its soundtrack, if that makes sense. It's still good, don't get me wrong, but it's just a different sound to the guitar, especially the plucking.
Mm-hmm. I just like the intro with the guitar. You know which part I mean. The dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Match it up with that one this time. That's right. I listened and heard.
There you go. There you go.
That's the part that really gets me. And everything past that is just icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. It's, like I said, least favorite girl. But I think she's got my favorite theme in the game.
My favorite theme is the girl that I played for the fourth route, and that would be Reen's theme. It's parody.
Admittedly, second favorite theme.
Reen is this bluntly philosophical, struggling artist who doesn't have any arms, which you'd think would make it difficult for an artist, but she uses her feet expertly in that regard. She's a really interesting character as far as the complexity of just trying to get a sense of where she's at when you're playing through her route. And it makes it the trickiest one to play, I think. But she's just fascinating. Her theme, though, it's my favorite and most memorable track of the game because it's this jazzy piano with syncopation, and it either is going through the melody when it gets to like the higher piano parts, or it feels like it's just soloing and it's improv, and it's really a cool piece that's unlike any other on the soundtrack.
Oh yeah, I was about to say that this song is nothing like the rest of the soundtrack. It's completely unique, even in the context of its own game, and that's super cool.
And it even has this little bit where percussion comes in, and like it just adds to like the quirkiness of the artist. It's a really, really cool piece. I like it a whole lot. But I'm not going to go with Hanako's theme as the fifth one in the 5 critical tracks. Instead, I have to include the best song, I think, and that's Moment of Decision. This is when it goes down. Big moments are happening when this track plays. And so the piano and strings are just haunting. It starts slow, but then when it kicks in, it is powerful. It fits those heavy narrative beats. And it's just, I think, not necessarily my favorite, but it's the best. Like, like, this is clearly a Katawa Shoujo song, and it's so well done.
It is the best of the piano pieces for sure. Yeah, it's memorable in that it is that song that plays. I mean, the song's called Moment of Decision. I mean, how much more clear could you get than that?
Pretty critical. Pretty critical.
I remember a couple of the moments where this plays, and the fact that I remember them at all, considering last time I touched this game was,
7 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while. That honestly should speak for itself, and this song is probably a really big part of that.
Yeah, it's just really, really well done. So for my tracks around the cutting room floor, I'll throw Hanako's theme in there. It's Painful History. And so Hanako is this timid bookworm who has burns all over her body from a house fire that killed her parents. So she has a lot of trauma from that, and she's this really timid character, and the theme supports that so well, and it starts really soft and timid like that. But it eventually grows to kind of just this gorgeous piece that really shows the growth of the arc over her story. So I think it's an important one to include there. And then I also wanted to include Fripperies. Fripperies composed by Blue 123. And I really think of just the school. It's a pretty common school, everyday sort of theme in the game. A lot of people, when they think of the Katawa Shoujo soundtrack, they think of this song. It's a pretty popular one.
For me, I've got some songs that I would put on the cutting room floor. First one being Red Velvet. which is kind of just a relaxing little jazz piece that I still, to this day, use whenever I need a background song for something that sort of has this theme, like a fireside chat or something like that. This is the song I go to.
For sure. It's a good one. I mean, it takes place in one theme in the whole game, in one route, but it's a really well done piece. And when this game came out in French, they re-released this song with a live saxophone player.
I haven't heard that, so I'm going to need a link to that.
It's fantastic. Definitely would recommend that.
Huh. I'd also put air guitar there. There's nothing super special about this song. It's just, this is one of the songs that's always been the most memorable to me when it comes to, like, songs that just play generically during life at Yamaku.
I don't know why it makes you think of Twilight Princess.
I could hear that, actually. I think it's the MIDI guitar. I think it's very similar to guitars they use in Twilight Princess, if I had to guess.
Probably.
But it's a very nice little relaxing piece. And lastly, Wyosna. Which is the title theme music, and I think I once saw, I think it was TV Tropes that described it. I don't remember the term they used for it, but it was just the general feeling of finishing a route, seeing the credits roll, and then coming back to the main menu, and the sort of emotion that this song starting to play gives you.
Oh, it's big on that.
Yeah, so I think this is a very important song to highlight as well.
I will not forget about Katawa Shoujo. It honestly feels weird to say, but I think it's really true. I think playing this game back when I did in 2012 made me a better person. And it's really not to say that, like, oh, I was a jerk before that, but the sense that you're, in a way, meeting all of these characters and they're portrayed, again, as real people because they are. It goes back to the whole idea of, if you're just from a small town and that's all you know and that's all you've lived, you'll only take that life experience with you. The more people you meet, the more you experience will make you a more well-rounded individual. It's why, going off to college can help. It certainly helped me. And playing games like this, it's remarkable to say about a video game, but to help with the empathy and to help that grow and to understand different people, even in a fiction created way, not many games you can say that it helped improve you as a person, just to make you more understanding. But I honestly think it did for me.
And to be honest, that empathy, something we need right now. A lot of it.
Yeah.
And I think I have roughly the same sort of feelings on it. Again, this has been a game that's been on my list of, I gotta replay that for years now. And eventually I will get back to it, I hope.
Well, I certainly hope so. It's another week of two great game soundtracks. I mean, Bloodborne goes to that heavy orchestra and that dark feeling, and there's just a lot of nice, calm, playful, romantic themes in Katawa Shoujo. So again, two very different soundtracks, but we like highlighting those different themes. Even from AAA, big effort, to a team of independent creators. I mean, it's just remarkable what we can cover on this show, and we're glad that you joined us on this show, especially when you can tell your friends and share and spread the word. And we'd love to hear from you what you would like us to cover on this show, you can do that by reaching out to our social media at Soundchat OST. I mean, give us feedback on how we're doing, what we can improve, suggestions for games that you'd like to hear us cover their soundtracks. You can find me personally on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at The Dobaga. And the video version for this podcast is over on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel. But if you want to take us, just in your ears, in your car, at work, wherever you are with the MP3 podcast version, that's over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play. We're up there. Check us out there. Man, Joe, another great week, and we're just keeping on moving along.
Yeah, I think this was a really good week. Again, two opposites, but I think in this case, it works out really well. I think the romantic, happier songs from Katawa probably did good to balance out the evil terror of Bloodborne.
I certainly couldn't imagine them flipped, that's for sure. Well, to play us out, we'll have another cover. This one also comes from YouTube. When I mentioned that live saxophone player for Red Velvet, he goes by Japesland on YouTube, and he did a saxophone cover for he did for several other Katawa Shoujo songs, but for this one, it's Wiasna, and I wanted to play that out. Thanks for listening to Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.